I wasn't trying to overhear anyone. That truth mattered to me because I had always believed that privacy deserved respect. Every evening around 10 o'clock, I followed the same quiet routine. I slipped on my worn slippers, wrapped my robe over my nightdress, and walked downstairs for a glass of water before bed. The house was almost dark except for the warm glow beneath the kitchen cabinets. My daughter-in-law always left those lights on overnight. After nearly a year of living there, I knew every inch of that house, despite reminding myself daily that it wasn't mine. I knew which floorboards squeaked outside the hallway. I knew the pantry door had to be opened gently or it would slam against the wall. I had learned to move carefully, making as little noise as possible, the way someone does when they are constantly aware they are living in another person's home. The back door stood slightly open, leaving just enough space for voices to drift inside. I recognized my daughter-in-law's voice immediately. She was speaking to her sister. "I swear," she sighed, "she walks around like she owns the place." I froze. Her words settled into the silence before more followed. And Aaron never says anything. He avoids every uncomfortable conversation. "My son," she continued without hesitation. "I do feel sorry for her, honestly, but this wasn't supposed to become permanent. She had her own house. She had her own life. Now she's here every single day." I stood at the edge of the kitchen, unable to move. Every morning, she's already awake making coffee, like I'm expected to appreciate it. I never asked her to do that. A brief silence followed before she spoke again. "I love Aaron, but sometimes it feels like I married his entire family." My fingers tightened around the kitchen counter. Then came the sentence I would never forget. "She's so quiet that it makes me uncomfortable. It's like she's always watching, always judging." I quietly stepped backward before either of them noticed me. I never poured the glass of water. I climbed the stairs slowly and returned to my room, carrying a heaviness that had nothing to do with my aching hip. My name is Margaret Hayes, although my closest friends have always called me Maggie. No one in this house ever did. My son usually called me Mom when he needed advice and Mother when he was trying to sound formal. My daughter-in-law rarely used my name at all. She had mastered the art of beginning sentences without addressing me directly. "Would you mind? Could you?" I was wondering. I was 66 years old. For 28 years, I had worked as a high school librarian in the same town. I had watched students borrow books, graduate, build families, and eventually bring their own children back to the very same library. I understood what it felt like to belong somewhere. I also understood what it felt like to lose that feeling. 11 months earlier, I had moved into my son Aaron's house after hip replacement surgery. The operation had been successful, but recovering my strength had taken far longer than expected. Aaron insisted, "Mom, don't stay alone. Come live with us until you're fully recovered." I resisted at first. I owned my own home, a cozy 2-bedroom cottage on Willow Lane that my late husband Thomas and I had spent decades paying off. Every room held memories we had carefully built together. The front porch overlooked a small flower garden. The backyard held raised vegetable beds. The walls were lined with bookshelves that stretched almost from floor to ceiling. Leaving that house felt like leaving part of myself behind. Still, Aaron convinced me it would only be temporary. I rented the house to a young married couple rather than leaving it empty. "I'll be back by spring," I told myself. Spring came, then summer, then autumn. Every season brought another reason to delay returning home. Physical therapy lasted longer. The tenants renewed their lease. The holidays arrived. One excuse quietly replaced another until my temporary stay became something no one discussed. So I adjusted. I cooked dinner twice each week. I kept my toiletries inside a small bag beneath the bathroom sink instead of spreading them across the counter. I did laundry before sunrise on Sundays, so no one had to wait for the washing machine. Most afternoons I stayed inside my bedroom reading because I didn't want to occupy the living room. I tried to become invisible. My granddaughter, Emma, was 12. She had reached that awkward age where grandparents became background furniture. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she walked straight past me without speaking. I never blamed her. Aaron worked long hours managing commercial properties. He came home exhausted almost every evening, carrying responsibilities he rarely talked about. He was kind, he was generous, but he was distracted, always distracted. My daughter-in-law, Claire, operated a successful event planning business from the converted study downstairs. Everything in her life followed a schedule. Every drawer had labels. Every cupboard had a system. She never openly criticized me. She didn't have to. A polite smile, a quiet sigh, or silently rearranging something after I'd finished using it always delivered the message. I responded the only way I knew how. I stayed quiet, I stayed helpful, I stayed small. But after overhearing that conversation on the back porch, I could no longer pretend that making myself smaller would ever make me feel at home. After that night, I began noticing things I had trained myself to ignore. Claire would unload the dishwasher after I had carefully arranged it and quietly put everything back in a different order. Aaron spoke about my preferences as though reading notes from a file. "Mom takes her tea without sugar," he would say to Claire while I sat 3 feet away. "Isn't that right, Mom?" Not "how do you take your tea?" Not "would you like some tea?" Just a fact to be confirmed. Even my belongings had gradually been relocated. My reading glasses, my cardigan, my library books, items that once rested on the hallway table, had been gathered into a wicker basket near the door. It was a small thing, but small things accumulate. They form a map. I started sleeping lightly. I started listening. One afternoon in November, I went into Aaron's office looking for a notepad. He had told me months earlier to help myself whenever I needed one. The top drawer always stuck a little before opening. As I pulled it open, a folder slid forward. Across the tab, in my son's handwriting, were the words, Mom, Financial, Medical Personal Planning File. Private, I should have closed the drawer immediately. Instead, I opened the folder. The first page listed my pension payments, projected income, and insurance information. Several lines were highlighted in yellow. Beneath it was a brochure for a senior care referral service. 3 facilities had been circled in blue ink. Next to one of them, in Claire's handwriting, was a note. Good reviews, 20 minutes away. Ask about memory care waiting list. I stared at the words until they blurred. I was 66. My hip had been replaced, not my mind. I closed the folder carefully, returned it exactly where I had found it, and shut the drawer. Then I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed. At the foot of the bed lay the quilt my mother had made 40 years earlier. I looked at it for a long time. I wasn't angry in the way people expect anger to feel. There was no shouting, no heat, no dramatic burst of outrage. What I felt was colder. It was the sensation of a suspicion finally becoming undeniable. I had spent months trying to prove that I wasn't a burden. Meanwhile, they had already begun planning for the day I would become one. That evening, I pulled a small fireproof box from beneath the bed. Inside were the deed to my house on Willow Lane, my savings records, and another document no one in Aaron's household knew about. 6 years before my husband died, Thomas and I had purchased a tiny lakeside cabin 2 hours north of the city. It had been cheap, weathered, and almost forgotten by everyone except us. Thomas spent 2 summers repairing the porch and sealing the roof. After he passed away, I kept paying the taxes every year, quietly. Not because I was hiding it, but because some things belong to a marriage, even after one person is gone. I held the cabin deed in my lap and made a decision. Then I called my friend Gloria. Gloria and I had worked together at the high school library for nearly 2 decades. 3 years earlier, she had moved into a small retirement community built around a pond and a walking path. "I knew you'd call eventually," she said after hearing my voice. "Is there space available?" I asked. "For the right person? Always." That Saturday, I drove out to see it. The cottages were simple, white clapboard homes with green shutters and small porches. Nothing about the place was luxurious, yet everything about it felt intentional. 2 women were walking beside the pond. A man was raking leaves. Someone had planted late-season kale in the community garden. No one looked rushed. Gloria showed me 2 available cottages. The first was pleasant. The second had a kitchen window facing east. I stood there imagining morning sunlight spilling across a table that belonged entirely to me. "People grow tomatoes out front," Gloria said, "and herbs. Helen next door keeps rosemary year-round." I walked slowly around the porch. The paint needed touching up. One step would need repair before winter. For the first time in months, I found myself thinking not about where I fit into someone else's life, but about how I wanted my own life arranged. I turned to Gloria. "I'll take it," I said. She laughed. "You haven't even asked the price." "I looked it up before." "I came," I replied. And for the first time since moving in with Aaron and Claire, I felt something that had been missing for a very long time. Relief. I refused to rush. That decision mattered more than anyone else could have understood. If I packed my things in anger, then my leaving would become a reaction to Claire's words or the folder hidden in Aaron's desk. I didn't want either of them to own that moment. This move had to belong to me. Over the next 3 weeks, I quietly put my affairs in order. My first call was to my attorney, Linda Foster, who had handled my legal documents ever since Thomas passed away. "I've decided to move," I told her. She wasn't surprised. "Back to Willow Lane?" she asked. "No," I replied. "Somewhere new." She listened without interrupting while I explained everything. When I finished, she simply asked, "You still own the Willow Lane house?" "I do." "And the lake cabin?" "Yes." "Good," she said. "That means every decision is still yours to make." Those words stayed with me. Every decision is still yours. I contacted a property management company to handle my rental house once the current tenant's lease expired. Then I signed the paperwork for my new cottage and paid the deposit. Each completed task felt like another brick laid beneath my feet. For months I had felt as though I were balancing on someone else's floor. Now I was building my own again. Back at Aaron's house, I began sorting through my belongings. The process revealed something I hadn't expected. Many of my possessions had quietly blended into their home. A brass table lamp that had belonged to my sister now stood beside Claire's reading chair. The blue mixing bowls from my old kitchen were stacked in one of her cabinets. Several of my cookbooks had disappeared onto shelves beside theirs until it was impossible to tell which belonged to whom. None of it had happened out of malice. Things simply drift. One object becomes another household object until nobody remembers where it came from. I reclaimed only what truly mattered: my mother's quilt, Thomas's pocket watch, my favorite rocking chair, 3 boxes of books collected over 40 years, a cast-iron skillet passed down from my grandmother, my sewing basket, 2 coffee mugs that had survived countless moves without a single chip, and 1 framed photograph. It showed Aaron at 9 years old standing on the porch of our Willow Lane home, proudly holding a tiny green frog with both hands. His smile stretched from ear to ear. I wrapped the picture carefully in newspaper, not because I wanted to take something away from him, because I wanted to keep that memory close to me. By the last weekend of November, everything was ready. Aaron and Claire had left for their annual anniversary trip. Emma was spending the weekend with Claire's parents. For 4 days, the house belonged only to me. Gloria arrived Saturday morning with her neighbor's pickup truck. Together, we carried each box outside. Neither of us spoke much. Some moments deserve silence more than conversation. When the last box had been loaded, I walked through the house one final time. The guest bedroom where I had spent nearly a year. The kitchen where I had cooked hundreds of meals. The back garden where I had planted lavender in the spring. I hoped someone would continue watering it. Before leaving, I did 3 things. First, I removed my brass lamp from the den and placed a handwritten note where it had stood. "I've taken my lamp home. It belonged to my sister." Next, I packed my blue mixing bowls and left another note on the kitchen counter. "These came from my kitchen. They've gone back with me." Finally, I sat at the dining table and unfolded 2 sheets of cream-colored stationery. I began writing to Aaron, not a note, a letter. I told him I loved him. I told him this wasn't revenge. I explained that I had accidentally found the folder in his desk and understood exactly what it represented. I wrote that planning someone else's future without including them in the conversation wasn't kindness. It was control disguised as concern. I reminded him that I was 66 years old, not 96. I still owned my own home. I still managed my finances. I still made my own decisions. Most importantly, I wrote the words I wished he had understood months earlier. I never needed someone to take over my life. I only needed someone to remember that it was still my life. At the bottom of the second page, I added my new address. Then I ended the letter with one final sentence. My door will always be open when you're ready to see me, not as someone to care for, but as the woman who raised you. I folded the pages carefully and placed them beneath his favorite coffee mug on the kitchen table. Then I picked up my keys, locked the front door for the last time, slipped the house key through the mail slot, and walked toward my car without looking back. Not because I was angry, because I had already said goodbye. The drive to my new cottage was peaceful. A light snow drifted across the highway, disappearing as soon as it touched the pavement. I turned off the radio and let the silence settle around me. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about whether I was inconveniencing someone else. I was simply driving toward the next chapter of my life. When I reached the retirement community, a warm light glowed through the front window of my cottage. Gloria had arrived before me. She had switched on the heat, placed a kettle on the stove, and left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. "Welcome home. Tea is waiting." I smiled before I even stepped inside. The cottage wasn't large, but every corner felt inviting. The wooden floors carried the marks of years gone by. The kitchen window overlooked the small pond where ducks floated lazily despite the cold weather. Along one wall stood an empty bookshelf waiting to be filled. I carried my first box inside and set it in the middle of the living room. Then I stopped. No one was waiting to tell me where to put it. No one would rearrange it later. Every decision belonged to me. That evening, I unpacked only the essentials. My mother's quilt covered the bed. Thomas's photograph rested on the bedside table. The rocking chair found its place beside the east-facing window, exactly where the morning sun would reach it. Everything else could wait. I made a cup of tea and watched snow gather on the porch railing until I fell asleep in the chair. The next afternoon, my phone rang. Aaron. I had expected the call. Over the weekend, he had left several voice messages. Some sounded confused. Others carried worry. The last one was filled with quiet regret. I answered. "Mom?" "I'm here," I replied gently. "I read your letter." "I know." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke again. "I didn't know you had found that folder." "I found it by accident." Another pause. "We were only trying to plan ahead." "For what?" I asked calmly. "For the day I became inconvenient?" "No," he answered quickly. "For the future. The future should include the person you're planning for." He didn't interrupt. "I have a new hip," I continued, "not a failing mind. I still make my own choices. If you were worried about me, all you had to do was ask me what I wanted." His voice grew quieter. "I should have talked to you." "Yes," I said softly. "You should have." Neither of us raised our voices. Neither of us argued. For the first time in a long while, we were simply having an honest conversation. Before hanging up, Aaron asked, "May I come visit you?" "Of course." "When?" "Whenever you're ready." "I miss you." "I never stopped being your mother," I answered. A few days later, I began settling into the rhythm of my new community. Every morning, several residents walked around the pond together. Nobody hurried. Conversations wandered from weather to gardening to favorite books. Nobody questioned why I had moved there. They simply welcomed me. Helen, my next-door neighbor, knocked one afternoon carrying a jar of homemade strawberry preserves. "I heard you enjoy gardening," she said. "I do." "Then you'll need these." She handed me a small envelope filled with tomato seeds she had saved from the previous summer. "The raised beds get wonderful sunlight." I thanked her. Within a week, we were drinking tea together every Tuesday afternoon. I also started volunteering twice each week at the county library. The children's librarian, a cheerful young woman named Olivia, quickly discovered my background. "You've done story time before, haven't you?" she asked after watching me read to a group of preschoolers. "For almost 3 decades." She smiled. "Then you're staying." I laughed. It felt wonderful to be needed because of my experience instead of my limitations. Slowly, the cottage began to feel less like a new house and more like home. Books filled the empty shelves. Fresh herbs appeared in the kitchen window. A knitted blanket covered the sofa. Photographs found their places on the walls. One evening, as I arranged a vase of winter branches on the dining table, I realized something important. For nearly a year, I had been trying to fit myself into someone else's life. Now I was building one that reflected my own. And the difference was remarkable. For the first time since Thomas died, I wasn't merely existing, I was living again. Winter settled gently over the little community. Each morning I pulled back the curtains and watched the pond shimmer beneath a thin layer of frost. The trees stood bare against the pale sky, and smoke curled lazily from the chimneys of neighboring cottages. It was a quiet life, exactly the kind I needed. My days developed a comforting rhythm. I walked around the pond with Helen and the others before breakfast. Twice a week, I volunteered at the county library, reading stories to children who listened with wide eyes and endless questions. In the afternoons, I read by the window, wrote in my journal, or planned what I would grow once spring arrived. For the first time in years, I no longer felt like I was waiting for permission to live. Then, one Thursday afternoon, there was a knock at my front door. When I opened it, I found Emma standing on the porch. She looked uncertain. "Dad brought me," she said quietly. "He's waiting in the car." I smiled. "Come inside." She stepped into the cottage, slowly looking around. The bookshelves were full now. The quilt rested across the sofa. Fresh bread cooled on the kitchen counter, filling the room with a warm, familiar smell. "It feels nice," she whispered. "I hope so. It feels like you." Her words touched me more deeply than she could have known. I invited her into the kitchen where we baked cinnamon cookies together. As we mixed the dough, she began talking about school, her friends, and the art competition she wanted to enter. There was no awkward silence this time. She was simply a granddaughter spending time with her grandmother. When the cookies were finished, we sat at the table with mugs of hot chocolate. Her eyes wandered to the overflowing bookshelves. "Have you really read all of these?" I laughed. "Most of them." She picked up a novel from the table. "Can I borrow this someday?" "You never have to ask," I replied. "Any book here is yours whenever you want it." She smiled. It was the biggest smile I had seen from her in months. A few minutes later, there was another knock. Aaron stood at the door. He looked tired, but there was something different about him. He wasn't carrying guilt anymore. He was carrying humility. "May I come in?" he asked. "Of course." He stepped inside and quietly looked around the cottage. His eyes paused on the photographs, the rocking chair, the books, and the little herb garden growing in the kitchen window. "It suits you," he said softly. "It does." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he turned toward me. "I owe you an apology." I waited. I spent so much time trying to solve problems that I forgot to ask whether there was a problem at all. I nodded but remained silent. "I should have listened," he continued. "I should have included you in every conversation about your future." "You should have," I answered gently. "I'm sorry." There was no dramatic speech, no tears, just an honest apology. Sometimes that is enough to begin healing. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. This hug was different from the hurried embraces we had shared over the past year. There was no obligation in it, only love. When he finally stepped back, Emma slipped her hand into mine. "Dad says we can visit more often." "I'd like that." "So would I," Aaron added. As they prepared to leave, I walked them to the porch. Snowflakes drifted through the evening air while the pond reflected the fading winter sunlight. Helen waved from next door, raising her mug in greeting before disappearing inside. Aaron smiled. "I think you found exactly where you belong." I looked around my little cottage, the porch Thomas would have loved, the shelves filled with books collected over a lifetime, the kitchen where laughter had returned, the garden beds waiting patiently beneath the snow. "Yes," I replied, "I finally have." That night, I opened my journal beside the soft glow of a beeswax candle. Instead of writing about hurt, disappointment, or regret, I wrote about Emma's laughter while decorating cookies, Aaron's sincere apology, Helen's friendship, and the first tomato seedlings I planned to plant when spring arrived. Outside, the lavender beside my front steps appeared brown and lifeless beneath the frost. Months earlier, I might have believed it was gone forever, but I had learned something important. Lavender retreats during winter. It gathers strength where no one can see it. Then, when spring returns, it blooms fuller and stronger than before. Perhaps people aren't so different. Sometimes we need to step away from places where we've become invisible. Sometimes we need to choose ourselves before others can truly see us again. As I closed my journal and looked around the home I had chosen for myself, I felt neither lonely nor forgotten. I felt peaceful. And after everything that had happened, peace was the greatest gift I could have given myself.